there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to make some artist trading cards, and I'm starting off with some Arches watercolor paper. Now I made these for my Italy art retreat. We wanted to do an artist trading card swap, so I figured I would make some to trade too, or actually just make some to give out to everyone because I wanted to make sure everybody got one. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do for this artwork until I went out for a walk, and this is a day before we left, and I'd walked the dog in the woods and all the leaves were falling, and I saw the birch trees and I thought, oh, it would be some fun to do something with like falling leaves and birch trees, and that's what we're going to do today. So I'm starting off by just taping my paper down. This is hot press watercolor paper from Arches, and I've got a few different kind of, well, you see these a lot. I use them a lot in my artwork. They're just rubber stamps, and basically what I want to do is get a little bit of pattern and texture. And I'd recently purchased these watercolor crayons by Mungio, and the reason I bought them is because there's 36 colors. I used to use this brand a lot with my students, my young students when I had my art studio downtown, and they only had sets of 8 back then. So I thought it would be kind of fun to get this larger set and see how they are. Now they're identical, or I should say they're the same, allegedly. They seem to be identical to the Jane Davenport Aqua Pastels, but again, they only come in 12 colors. So I thought it'd be fun to have this big set, and it was about $27. So they definitely were a good priced product for, concentrated sticks of color. And I don't know about you, but I just love pastel-like products. And so I sprayed my stamp and scribbled on some of the crayons there. And I'm just going to go and fill these 2 pages with texture. So when you do this stamping with crayon technique, and this is going to work with your Neocolor 2 crayons, it'll work with chalk pastels. It'll work with any sort of pastel product you have that is dissolvable with water. So not your oil pastels, but definitely your chalk pastels, definitely any watercolor crayons, you could even brush on watercolor paint for that matter. I wanted to keep it fairly light, and I just wanted to have a bunch of random textures. And I think that's the key. So my thought was that I would paint a bunch of birch trees, and then this texture would show through on the birch trees. But we ended up with a few surprising effects that I actually really loved. So you may never have the desire to paint a bunch of artist trading card birch trees. Actually, I loved how the paintings came out, and it kind of pained me to cut them apart. You'll see at the end. But this is kind of a fun technique for when you want to put a background on a painting. And I'm using a hot press watercolor paper, which basically means it's smooth, but you could do this on a cold press paper too. You might not have as crisp of an image, but since we're doing this kind of abstract thing, I don't really think it matters that much. And here you can see exactly the technique I'm doing. It works on both rubber stamps and clear stamps. I will say rubber stamps generally will give you a better effect with this technique, but it works either way. And I just love to have a bunch of like ledger and script and damask type of designs, just kind of, I would say just kind of almost generic backgrounds handy for anytime I'm doing jelly printing or painting and I want to throw a little bit of just, I don't want to say generic because they're not really generic. They're just more just classic patterns, I would say classic background patterns. The ledger, one of the ledger and the damask stamps are from my Sketchbook Floozy line of products through Craft World. The other ones are some I found on Amazon. You certainly don't need to have any name brand anything in your stash from 10 years ago is totally fine. What I'm doing here is adding a little bit of color because I didn't want stark white. I wanted to have there to be some color, and scribbling the crayon on the masking tape makes like a little bit of a palette. And so I'm just kind of toning down some of the pattern here and there where I thought it was a little bit too much. You could also do that with watercolor pencils. If you had woodless watercolor pencils, you could use the same technique. You don't need the watercolor crayons. Seriously, anything that is like pastel-like, like woodless product, it would be difficult to do it with a regular wooded watercolor pencil, but unless you had the Stabilo Woodies, those are so thick, they would be just fine. But yeah, you can also pick up the media with a wet brush. It doesn't work quite as well though with the watercolor crayons with these particular ones because they're not as soft as like a Neocolor 2. So scribbling them definitely works better. Now the thing with watercolor crayons is that they have a little bit of a wax to them, and that little bit of a wax is going to come into play later on and create a little bit of a resist. So this paper is completely dry. I made sure to let it dry, and then I heat set it just to be safe with my heat tool. And the paper dried out perfectly flat, which I was really happy happy about. So now what I want to do is use some masking tape to make birch trees. And because I don't want to have them all exactly like 3/4 of an inch wide, I'm going to tear the tape down a bit and put them in varying widths of strips. Now I do have a couple different widths of masking tape that I'm going to use, but I'm also going to cut it down so that I have some more random skinnier strips. Now, if I was doing a painting, I probably would try hand tearing it, but that was not working very well for me. So I just used my X-Acto knife to cut different strips and just tried to wiggle my blade as I did it. And I tried to get like 2 to 3 strips per width of tape just to keep it a little bit more random, so I could have not just absolutely straight sides on every one. And basically I just tried to fill it up because these are going to be cut down to 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches. I need to make sure I'm going to have enough strips on each little card so that it looks like birch trees. Otherwise it's just going to look like stripes and it's going to look kind of weird, and I didn't want that effect. So that took a little bit of time, not too bad. It's actually a really fun project to do, and I'm thinking about doing this larger for a couple paintings to go on either side of my mantle. I like to switch out the paintings over my mantle a couple times a year for fun. And yeah, now I'm going to put in some granulating watercolors, and that palette there is my DIY granulating palette that I posted a tutorial on and a blog post on a couple of years ago when the granulating paints were getting really popular. And the reason I did that is because a lot of us have paints that granulate in our stash anyway, and a lot of the super granulating paints that you buy are just mixes of pigment that granulates naturally plus, other pigment that doesn't, to give you those interesting color splits. So if you learn your pigment numbers and you look at what the color you want to buy is, you may have those pigments in your stash already and you can make your own palette. So what I did was basically tested a bunch of different paints. I pulled out the ones that were most granulating and made a special palette of it. And I also wanted to use these new Rosa watercolors because I purchased some open stock on Etsy and they're so pretty that I thought, I want to use some of these too. So that's Coral that you're seeing right there. It's such a beautiful color. It does have red in it. It's not a light fast color, unfortunately. I think it's like PR4 and white. So, but artist trading cards are not going to be something that's going to be hung up. They're generally kept in binders. So I went for the color that I wanted to use more than worrying about light fastness. And I also have, and I reviewed these a few years ago, the Rosa granulating colors. They came out with like 8 granulating colors a few years ago that are really pretty, very soft and kind of smoky looking. I use some of those, and I'm really drenching this paper. You really need it. You really need your paper drenched to see the full granulation, especially where you're working on a hot press paper here. It's not going to show as much of the texture as you would on a cold press or rough paper, which, lets the pigment separate out into the hills and valleys and give you more of an effect there. So I just really wanted to make sure I had plenty of color because paper was really wet. I knew it was going to dry lighter, and I just really wanted that like bam fall foliage New England colors in there because that's where I come from, and I'll be meeting people from all over the world, and I just want to kind of give them a little piece of home, basically. So that's what I was doing here, and I kind of was worried. I'm like, am I doing too much? Am I putting too much on here? I also find a painting like this is very stress relieving, and I'm somebody who's a nervous traveler. And getting ready to go and teach for a week in Italy was, I don't say stressful, but I was kind of like, I was very, I don't know, a little worried I was going to forget something, or I was going to do a bad job, or, I was just kind of like a little nervous. So having a project like this was really nice for just stress relief. Look at those colors though. Aren't they pretty? Oh my gosh. I could not wait to peel the tape up basically. And then I peeled the tape up, and then I thought, oh no, the paint leaked under the tape. How did this happen? I pressed it down so good. It was hot press paper. It should have worked perfectly. So I was kind of freaking out because this is the day before I am flying out, and I'm like, oh no, how am I going to save this? So I'm like, okay, we're going to keep going. The only way out is through, right? The only way, either I'm going to have artist trading cards or I'm not. And there's still, I was feeling like, yeah, it can be saved. And what I think happened here was the wax from the watercolor crayons kept the tape from sticking really well, and it let the paint seep underneath, almost like it made like a little, it just didn't let it bond, and made like a little river or a little path for the paint to fall through, to seep under. But it did look kind of cool. So at this point, I'm like, well, let me give this a really good dry, because obviously what was under the tape was not dry. The background was dry, but since stuff was able to slip under there, it was still wet. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do? This is, I'm not happy. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to use a pen. I'm going to do some pen and ink. I'm going to outline the birch trees, and then we'll go from there. Maybe I'll bring out some watercolor ground or some paint or something. I don't know. So here comes the very big struggle with the dip pen. So I went and got I don't use dip pens very often, but I bought all my students dip pens and nibs for a gift to put in their I made little goodie bags for them. And I thought this will be fun. We can load up our dip pens, and I'll just use this pen. I know it's a good pen because it was recommended from Sketchbook School. It's a Zebra brand. They make good nibs. But my ink, which was Speedball ink, which is a good ink, it had like evaporated, and it was just like this like syrupy clump in there. So I'm like, no worries, I'm going to add some water to that. But I just shook it up. I was too impatient just to give it a good stir, and so I am struggling so much with this ink and this pen. It's like the ink is not flowing because it's too thick, and I'm like, oh my word. But it's kind of one of those things where it's like I don't have a lot of time. It's like you don't have enough time to do things properly, so you rush it, and then you spend more time trying to fix what you didn't do properly. So that was the moral of this little project. But I'm kind of thinking, oh, that does kind of look like birch trees. I'm kind of liking this. I think it's gonna work. So I'm plugging away. I think I probably put some more. Look, I'm dipping my credit card scraper into the drop blob of ink on my mat because I'm just like, what am I going to do here? So yeah, so I'm drawing outlines with the nib. I'm using a credit card scraper to scrape the blobs of ink across to make it look like birch trees. And actually it's working pretty well. So I'm kind of seeing the light. I'm like, okay, this is looking cool. I'm happy with this. I've made a complete mess of my pen. I ended up having to go and clean all the pen and like stir the ink, and I don't know why I just didn't stop right then and do that, but I think I was just so impatient and so like stubborn that I'm like, no, I am doing this. I'm not going back upstairs because my studio's in the basement still, I know, and I'm like, no, I am pushing through. I am gonna persevere and get this done, and yeah, I'm not gonna go clean this. This is like a comedy of errors at this point. The pen is just caked with globby, dried up India ink. It's like I've got this very odd mixture because it's like half dry. I didn't really stir it up very well. I think probably the handle of that ink is all messed up because I did kind of stir it with the pen. It was just not going well. So then I'm like, okay, I'm going to take these, I've got these nice big chunky Artex acrylic markers. I'm going to go in and make the trees a little bit more birchier by painting some white in there. Now, a lot of times your acrylic marker ink is not going to be super opaque. So I'm like, that'll be great because if some of the paint shows through, it'll show some of that texture through. And that's kind of what I wanted. I didn't want them stark white. So I just kind of went through with these chunky Artex markers and filled in some of the areas. These are a great deal. If you love big markers, they are... you can get them in a 10 millimeter nib. You can get them in a 15 millimeter nib. And also they come in every single type of configuration of marker that you can think of. Artex has gone big on the acrylic marker front. They started off doing alcohol markers, and they still have their alcohol markers, but they definitely have leaned in more on the acrylic markers. I think possibly because acrylic markers have become so popular. But the only acrylic markers from theirs I didn't really enjoy were their Simp Tap markers. Those I had a hard time with. I found them to be, I kind of exploded a couple of them starting them off, and I found those to be a little less reliable, but there are other markers I've had really good luck with. So if you are in the market for some acrylic markers and you don't want to pony up the money for Posca or Molotov, I would definitely recommend giving these a try, especially for these larger sizes that tend to be really expensive otherwise. So I did go in with a little bit of the black wide marker and the wide white marker, and then I thought, you know what, birch trees generally will have some like really light pale kind of like peachy color and minty color, and I thought, we can bring some of those in with one of their brush markers. I also took a black brush marker and decided to give some expressive branches here and there because the pen just wasn't doing it for me. The pens are fine. I loaded some up with watercolor ink at the retreat. We did some little projects with those. It was totally 100% the ink and user error. But I do like how this is coming out. In fact, I was kind of like, oh, I'm kind of bummed that I have to cut these up because this would be really fun to hang over the mantle. I might do long, skinny versions of this painting and maybe a little bit wider trees to have on either side of the mirror over my mantle, because I think it would just be really fun. I have a big oil painting, like a 3 foot by 4 foot oil painting of birch trees that I did with a palette knife in my living room. I don't know. I just love birch trees. I don't know what it is. They're just, I don't know. I don't know why I like them. I also like Dalmatians. Maybe it's a black and white thing. I don't know. So now I'm like, I want to have a little more texture in here. So I'm taking this really wide brown Ardex marker, and I'm going to stamp with that. I did blot out some of the, there's one area, it's like a postmark that's really dense. I didn't want that in there, but I wanted to give a little more texture back in because I had covered up a lot with the white marker. And so I'm just re-inking this large script text. This is, I think it's Quetzalcraft, either Quetzalcraft or Paper Artsy. I think it's Quetzalcraft though. I don't think they're in business anymore. I think they closed. But any big script markers fine. Now the thing is, if you use, and these really wide Ardex markers are great for inking up a stamp because they're so wide, but don't let the ink dry. What you want to do is take an old toothbrush and some dish soap and just scrub that stamp when you're done. These big stamps I don't mount because I know I'm going to use them for different things and I'm probably going to have to scrub them in the sink. So that's why I don't mount them on wood. That's why I don't put cling foam on them, because the water will damage a cling foam. I just keep them flat like this, and this is how I use them. I'm generally using them as a texture and not so much as like wanting to get a superb crisp background. I'm using it just as a texture background, and I want it kind of hit or miss. So that's why I don't mount those. Now I also decided to flick on some metallic watercolor. I use the Altenew watercolor, and that gave it a really pretty shimmer. I don't know if I forgot to turn the camera on. Probably. It was a long day. But aren't these pretty? Oh my gosh. I kind of would just like to tack those up on my wall and look at them because I think they're so pretty. But we're going to cut them up. I think they're so pretty though, but we're going to cut them up. I'm looking back at this and I'm like, oh, I want to paint that again. Those were fun and those were pretty. I hope you guys try it. It's such a fun project. So first thing I'm going to do is trim off the excess. Now you can get a lot of artist trading cards. This is a 9x12 piece of paper. So I'm just trying to make sure, cut it down to like 8.5 by 11 because I can get 10 artist trading cards from an 8.5 by 11. Now it's kind of, I was thinking of them mostly being upright like this, but I'm going to end up with some like shorter, wider tree, you know what I mean? So I'm gonna have some that are upright and some that are the long way. So basically what you do is you cut down the paper to 8.5 by 11, then you cut that paper into two 2.5 inch wide strips and one 3.5 inch wide strip. It'll work out equally. And then the 3.5 inch wide strip like this, you cut into 2.5 inch tall strips, and then the 2.5 inch long strip you cut into 3.5 inch long strips. Does that make sense? Anyway, you get 10 artist trading cards per sheet of paper that way. So I knew I was going to have 20. I only needed 16 to give away, but it's nice to have some extras. And actually, those would be really cute mounted on a greeting card, I think. Like you could do an A2 card that's made with, like half sheet of regular cardstock, and that would be a cute little decoration. You could stamp your sentiment. I think that would be just so pretty to do. So after cutting them all up, I decided that I wanted to sign the backs of them, and I decided, and the scraps are so pretty. I decided to keep the scraps. I could use those to embellish cards or something. I don't know. They were just too pretty to throw away, and they feel really nice because they were made with thick watercolor paper, and they've got the beautiful paints and metallics on them and inks on them. They just feel luxurious in my opinion. So I have this little die cut of the state of Maine. I've had that forever. I bought it at a yard sale actually, and I cut out a bunch of little states of Maine out of this kind of gray-green paper, and then I punched out some little hearts out of red cardstock. They were actually left over from I made a bunch of envelopes to go inside the sketchbooks that we were making. So I decided I would use those scraps to punch out the little hearts and the little state of Maine, and then it would match their sketchbooks if they want to like glue them on the sketchbook. So I did this to the back of all the artist trading cards, and I just wrote my name and the year so that they would know who they came from in case they collect a bunch of artist trading cards. That way, that way they would have that. And that was pretty much it for this project. You can buy little sleeves for your artist trading cards. They're sold for baseball trading cards. And if you find that you enjoy trading artist trading cards, then you can get sleeves. They're like page protectors. They fit in a binder, and they will hold 9 artist trading cards per sleeve, or 18 if you do them back to back. And you can find those at any office supply store, any place that sells you can probably find them at Target or Walmart, Amazon. You can also find them at any place that sells baseball cards, any sort of hobby shop like that, although they'd be cheaper at an office supply store. But it's a great way to keep them organized. And, for the horizontal ones, I just put the state of Maine going the other way so that my writing would be correct on the back. And yeah, I think they just look fantastic. I was so sad to cut up the paintings, but I really love how they came out. I love how you get these just like random little bits of the colors that I used. And it was fun to design these because you're starting with a big painting that you know you're going to cut up. So you want to think of it almost as an abstract and, disperse your colors out so that all the cards get a little bit of every color. And they all come out a little bit differently, even though they're all part of a theme. Now, these bags are actually from Paper Mart. They're just little, I think they were like 3-inch by 5-inch cello bags. And I just put them in to keep them protected. And that way, if they trade with other participants, I know not everybody made 16, like they made a couple and they would trade, they would have room to keep their other ones in there safe and sound until they got home with their trading cards. And this was such a fun project. It was a great way to use some materials, great way to, warm up, a great way to just have fun and to create something to share. I hope you enjoyed this project. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And until next time, happy crafting. Bye.